All right, let's talk Talladega race preview and initial thoughts. Just going to do one video just because it's just the Xfinity series and the Cup series this weekend. More or less, a lot of the thoughts are going to be very similar. So I didn't want to put out a repetitive video. So just going to combine it into one. A lot of this isn't going to be new. It's very similar to some of the other, super speedway preview videos that we've put out there, but wanted to still get something out there nonetheless. So it is Talladega weekend. And if you're not familiar, if you're new here, if you're new to playing NASCAR DFS, Talladega is a super speedway. It's a 2.66 mile track that we go to. So the type of racing that we see there is different. Everyone's going to be racing in a pack, bumper to bumper, inches away from each other for a majority of the race. And because of that, normally we see increased probability and increased chance of there being wrecks in the field. And it also changes your approach a little bit from the DFS standpoint of, how we want to roster drivers and how drivers can be optimal and, score points for your lineup. So one thing to kind of keep in mind when you are building lineups is salaries don't matter. Normally when you're playing NASCAR DFS, it's like, okay, you want to spend probably close to the $50,000 that you have to work with. But when you get to these type of races, it doesn't matter, whether you're leaving thousands of dollars on the table or hundreds of dollars on the table, even $15,000-$20,000 on the table. Like, it really doesn't matter too much. So don't worry about that. The narrative that you're going to hear this week, from basically anybody who is talking about NASCAR this weekend, and especially from a DFS standpoint, is the stack the back mentality. Well, what the heck does that mean? Basically, it means that when you are building your lineup, you kind of want to sort the grid, I would say, or the drivers by starting grid, and you want a majority of your drivers starting normally towards the rear of the field. So for us, that's usually 20th on back. You can kind of have different cutoff points, whether it's 15th, 20th, 25th. Like, just find a cutoff point, and then when you are stacking it back, just have majority of your drivers starting from that cutoff point and further back. Whether that's 4 drivers, whether that's all 5, whether it's all 6. It really kind of depends on which way you want to approach it. I think there's a couple of different approaches you can have depending on the type of the outcome that you're looking for, and B, the type of games that you are, the type of tournaments and games that you're playing on Draftkings. So if you're playing cash games, or if you have the narrative of, I just think this is going to be a wreck fest, I feel like there's going to be one big wreck that's going to take out a bunch of cars, and a bunch of cars are going to DNF, and all these drivers in the back you normally wouldn't have a chance, I think they're going to advance their position. Or if you're just playing like head to head or double ups, I think what you really want to do is just assume that it's going to be a wreck fest and just play all of your drivers starting 20th on back. It doesn't really matter, who they are, as long as they have a lot of place differential upside, because you have to remember when you're playing NASCAR DFS, there's 3 ways to score points. Leading laps, running fast laps, and then place differential. Well, when you get to Talladega in all these super speedways, it's pretty much impossible to figure out who the lap leader is going to be. And there aren't a ton of laps available. And normally the lap leader changes quite often. And if you lead, 25, 30 laps and you wreck out and finish, 28th or 29th, well, those laps led points really aren't going to do too much for you. The other way to score points is fast laps, but because everyone is drafting and you actually run faster in a pack, those fast lap points are basically just distributed pretty much evenly throughout the field. It's almost impossible to figure out, who's going to run the fastest lap. It just kind of depends on who kind of has the best draft throughout that lap, and is that's basically it. So fast laps and laps led are basically out of the equation. So then it comes down to, okay, well, there is place differential, and only some drivers are going to have it because others physically won't be able to give you any place differential points, just depending on where they're starting. And this other way to score points is then finishing points. So yeah, it's great to have a driver who starts 35th and finishes 28th, but it's even better to have a driver who starts like 23rd and finishes 8th, because not only are they giving you place differential, but they're also giving you this finishing points as well. So that's kind of the sweet spot. If you can find drivers who have place differential upside and the ability to finish, top 10, those are kind of the slam dunk plays that you really want to be trying to focus on, or hope that, luck goes your way and, your driver's going to make it through. However, I will say if you are playing, GPPs and you're playing tournaments and you're wanting to take down a tournament, you have to get more aggressive than that. Because yeah, you might cash. And if that is your mindset going into it, then yeah, you still want probably a majority of your drivers starting towards the rear. However, if you are trying to get that optimal lineup, you have to be a little bit more aggressive. We've seen, looking at the data, that usually there's drivers starting in the top 20 who are making that optimal lineup because A, maybe that driver wins the race, or B, maybe there's a driver who starts 10th and finishes 3rd. Like, you just never know. The only problem is, if you roster one of those drivers and that driver wrecks, there's a good chance you aren't going to cash. If you roster a driver who starts towards the rear of the field and they crash, you still have a pretty good chance of cashing because they're really not going to lose you any points. And the biggest thing is you just want to avoid scoring negative points. So I know it's a lot right there, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of an understanding of kind of, the cash games. I just want to cash approach versus, hey, I'm going for the optimal lineup, and it's like all or nothing. Another thing that I think is really interesting when we get to super speedway races is the ownership game. So there's no practice this weekend. It's only qualifying. But once the grid is set, like, you'll see, maybe like, that probably won't happen, but like Ryan Blaney, for example, like if Ryan Blaney qualifies like 25th or 30th, like he's going to be stupidly high owned compared to maybe a driver who doesn't get as much attention. Maybe like, I don't even know who it could be, but like literally just any, maybe Cole Custer, or maybe even, Landon Castle, or something, like, who starts right next to that driver. Like, everyone is going to go to Ryan Blaney, and no one's really going to be playing kind of the, I don't want to say the no name driver, but the driver that doesn't have the top tier equipment, or the driver that doesn't have the name recognition. So if you see a driver or multiple drivers could be really high owned, we usually just try to pivot off of them just because they have as much of a chance of ranking as anybody else. And you can get a lot of leverage by some of these ownership games. Talked about sorting the field and kind of finding your cutoff points and just kind of picking your drivers from there. Like I said, there's no practice this weekend. It's only qualifying. I know the Xfinity cars, I feel like, qualify on Friday. Cup qualifies on Saturday. So it gives us plenty of time to fill out this spreadsheet that everybody likes. And, we'll show you exactly kind of where we're going to, but, spoiler alert, I guarantee most of the drivers who start, 25th, 30th, 40th on back, we're probably going to have a lot of high interest around them, but we'll try to give you some different pivot plays and, guys we feel potentially might be high owned. Talked about how dominator points are distributed. Best way is to get those place differential plays who also have the ability to finish well. So if you can just survive the wrecks, if you are watching DraftKings, the entire slate can flip in one lap with one wreck. So normally it looks really ugly or potentially looks really good, and all of a sudden, boom, the next lap, either things have drastically increased for you or have drastically decreased for you, depending on which drivers were involved in those accidents. The last thing I will say, however, is, every time we go to these super speedways, everyone always prepares for the wreck fest, but usually one race out of the year, like, I guess it's a little bit different now that we've added Atlanta, but normally there's normally 4 super speedway races throughout the year, and usually one of them ends up kind of going green. And if you're stacking the back when the race goes green, your strategy is basically toast. Because if there aren't any wrecks, there isn't any opportunities. There aren't. There just isn't the option for the drivers who start in the back to pass those guys up front, and then you're going to be throwing money down the drain. So every once in a while, like I said, usually one race out of the year, it is green. Historically speaking, this kind of spring Talladega race tends to be a little bit on the cleaner side, but with these next gen cars and the drivers that we have, and just all the unknowns, and the chances of a tire going down or a mechanical failure or something, like I'm still going to be building for a wreck fest. I'd much rather you know, sit there and hope that drivers spin out than be on the edge of my seat hoping that, they save it and, they're racing clean. So that'll do it for the race preview. I know it's a lot of stuff that we've probably have said in previous videos, but again, just wanted to put something out there. We'll be posting our spreadsheets once qualifying is done, and we should have a final, picks video, but more or less it's going to be a lot of the same things. We'll just kind of tell you some of the drivers we feel like are going to be chalky, and some potential low owned plays you can figure out this weekend. So thank you as always, everybody, and we will catch you on the next one.